Wokingham Today is hosting a series of interviews with party leaders ahead of the local elections. Joining us today is Councillor Andy Croy, leader of Wokingham Labour. So Andy, I wondered if you could tell us first of all, what motivates you as a local politician?
What motivates me as a local politician? I guess first and foremost, there's that desire to make one's area and make one's community a better place to live in. Wokingham's quite unusual. Where it's a very, very heavily conservative area, and I think that sense that there are other voices in the community and there are other schools of thought that just aren't being heard in council, and which need to be heard in council, and which need to be reflected in local decision making, are the things which keep me going.
What do you think is the one thing that sets your party apart from all of the other contenders?
The one thing which sets us apart is, I guess, if we were to win every seat in the elections, we still wouldn't have enough seats to form a majority on the council. So we are under no illusions that we are going to be running the council. So we are very much geared towards providing an effective opposition to whoever's running the council. It could be the Conservatives, it could be the Liberal Democrats, but we are sure, well, we know that in order for local government to be as good as it can be, it needs to have an effective opposition. You need to challenge and to test the ideas of the ruling group, whoever that group is. So that's one of our commitments to residents, is that we will provide opposition. That's what we're there for.
If you had to characterise your candidates in just one word, how would you sum up?
Hardworking. It's a very, very difficult gig being in the Labour Party in Wokingham Borough. For our candidates to get anywhere, we have to work twice as hard as other candidates. And that, I think, is reflected in what our councillors are like. If one elects a Labour councillor, that they don't disappear, they don't pop up again in 4 years' time asking for your vote. They have to work every single weekend of the year, every day of the week we're available, just because that's the only way we can stay competitive. Hardworking.
Now, I'd like to ask you some topics about the environment and the climate emergency. What will your party do within the next year to move forward on that plan for a net zero carbon emissions by 2030?
Okay, we have tried to persuade and to encourage the Conservatives to have a citizens' assembly on the climate emergency. We think the decisions that we need to make about how we live are so radical and so far-reaching that there's a danger that they become politicised, and you need to take politicians out of this equation and say to the people of Wokingham Borough, here is the problem. You guys come up with the things you are prepared to do to allow us to become carbon neutral. And we introduced a motion to council to this effect. The Conservatives voted against it. I was pleased that the Lib Dems voted for it. But at the end of the day, it lost because there's a Conservative majority. But we have an ongoing campaign, and we have a petition. So via our petition, hopefully, we will bring this issue back to council, whether or not we're running the council or not. You know, as I said, even if we win every single election, we're not going to be in a position on our own to make this happen. But it is certainly one of our biggest priorities over the next year.
How would something like a citizens' assembly directly impact the community and the residents that live here?
I think the outcome of the citizens' assembly, residents would know, were not the result of party politics. The outcome of the citizens' assembly, that the recommendations of the assembly would be from people. Now, let's be clear that the way a citizens' assembly is not by me or other party leaders appointing people to the assembly. It's almost like a sort of a form of jury service where people would be selected at random, but with controls to make sure that the people on the assembly accurately reflected the demographic composition of the population. So we've got people who live in rural areas, people who live in urban areas, we've got old, we've got young, we've got all sorts of different demographics in the community. Now, they have to be represented on the assembly so that the assembly genuinely speaks for the people of Wokingham Borough and doesn't just speak for political parties and for you know, either the petrol lobby or for the green lobby. It's not about all the vested interests getting into a room and fighting. It's about normal people being presented with the evidence and being asked to discuss amongst themselves as normal people, not as representatives of parties. There may be nobody with any party affiliation in this assembly at all, but this is its power, because people know it is out of politics and it is about the people. It's almost a very sort of fundamental form of democracy in that sense. So I think that would then give the recommendations of the Assembly a legitimacy which the current climate emergency plan adopted by the borough simply does not have. It is not a legitimate plan. It is not a working plan. It is mostly a collection of things which the council has already done and which it has now decided, oh, this is part of our climate emergency response, and they're not.
The Lib Dem group specifically, they have said that it would only achieve about 50% of that net zero goal.
Mm.
Why do you think the council has declared a goal if it's not going to be achieved?
So that it looks good on leaflets. It's very, the whole Conservative response to the climate emergency has been political posturing. It's not been a serious response. It's been top down from the centre. We care about the climate emergency. This is what we're going to do. There's been no real engagement. You know, having a Facebook group to collect ideas is, if that's your only form of engagement, you know, it's ridiculous. It's amateurish and it's a little bit embarrassing. I mean, the Lib Dems voted for the climate emergency plan. So I am surprised that they've now realised that it's not going to add up. I mean, we voted against it because although none of the individual ideas in the plan are themselves wrong, I mean, everyone wants a few more trees, everyone wants, you know, more places to cycle. The totality of the plan was not good enough. The plan has never, ever been good enough. And that's why we voted against it. We refused to vote something that isn't going to do what it says on the tin.
Thank you, Andy. Talking more about issues on the ground now, the change from black boxes to recycling bags has caused a lot of public confidence. Now, this was done without a consultation in hopes to improve the recycling rates. What do you think about the decision to not consult on something that will affect everyday lives of residents?
It's typical of the way that the Conservatives have run the borough. We've seen them spend huge amounts of money on the housing consultation. A few years ago, you may recall, they spent, I don't know, 50 or 60,000 pounds asking people in the borough if there were too many houses in the borough or too many houses being built. It's like, well, it's a bit like asking everyone if the sky is blue, isn't it? Everyone knew the answer, but it cost the Conservatives £50,000 to find out the answer. In terms of the recycling, there are issues, big issues in terms of the ability of people who have limited function in their arms and their fingers to open and close the bags and to use the bags. And a proper consultation would have established this. And it may be we need a system where actually people can use either the green bags or the black boxes. We cannot have a system where, because people are unable to use the green bags, then their recycling is not being picked up. It's what has happened, and it's one of the points in our manifesto is that consultations must be meaningful. They mustn't be tick box exercises, because that destroys trust in the local authority. And we see this all the time. You know, if you look at social media, there's a consultation and half of the responses are people saying, well, you know, you've already made up your mind. What's the point? So disappointing, but not unexpected.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to a different topic now, housing and planning specifically. Residents again and again are concerned that there is a lack of infrastructure, I mean DPs being DPs, to support the volume of development in the borough. What could Wokingham Labour do to improve this?
Okay, well, I think we would like to move to a system where the council is much more proactive in putting some infrastructure in ahead of development. It's no good at, you know, approving houses and then getting the money for the roads after the houses. You need to put the roads in first. And we've been campaigning on this for several years, and the borough is now much better at advertising the new roads, we think, as a response to our highlighting the issue. The unfortunate truth is at the moment, some parts of local services are outside of the control of local authorities. So the borough does not have a say in how many GPs there are. This is the responsibility, I think, of the clinical commissioning group and the NHS. And we do have an issue where our health services are outside of democratic control. They're a bit like academies in a way. You know, the academies are not controllable by the council. So what they do is entirely up to them. And it is a problem. And I think if it isn't in the gift of Wokingham Labour to bring health service provision into local democratic control, but I would certainly support moves towards that. I mean, we don't want to politicise the delivery of health services, but where the health service is reacting to increased population by just jigging around the people in the surgery who see patients. So instead of there'll be fewer GP consultations and more nurse consultations and more pharmacy consultations, that doesn't leave people very convinced that they're getting the best possible service. So sometimes one has to say it's difficult for us to control that, but the problem does reflect an issue into how our society is organised.
When it comes to younger people, the under 30s, for example, they're being increasingly priced out of Wokingham when it comes to both buying and renting as well. What can you do beyond any existing plans to create homes people can afford to live in here?
I think it's a really important question, but both the chairman of our constituency, or the chair of our constituency party, is under 30, as is the chair of our borough party. So, you know, young people are very well represented in our party. And what the issue you've highlighted is, should somewhere to live be a fundamental human right, or should it be something that somebody else can make a profit out of? And at the moment, we have a housing system which is based on the premise that people can make profit out of other people's right to have decent accommodation. And this is why we support a massive increase in the amount of council houses we build, because we think growing up in a council house and having your first home as a council house should be a normal part of moving through life. And that when people are younger and they're looking to move out of home, there should be a council property. And the reason I say council and not social and affordable is because people know what a council house is. It is a place where you can go that's provided for you as a right, so you've got somewhere to live, and the rent will be reasonable. It will be possibly half of market rent. If you then decide that while you're living in that house, you want to save up your deposit and move into the private sector, that's absolutely fine. But what we can't have is private sector landlords being subsidised by taxpayers via the housing benefit and the universal credit system, because that's what we have at the moment. You know, the council taxpayers are subsidising private landlords because of the high private sector rents that are way beyond the affordability of most young people. So for us, it would be a big priority, and the word affordable, I don't like it. You know, I like stuff which is affordable, clearly, but it's meaningless in Wokingham. Affordable in the housing sector means 80% of market rents. Well, if your market rent is sky high, 80% of sky high is still sky high. You know, it's not actually materially cheaper for people who are trying to rent.
Well, I will ask you a question about affordable housing, and that is the fact that it wasn't built in the Carnival Pool development plan. What do you think that message sends to developers?
I think that the message to developers is that in Wokingham, you can get away with it. You know, we have a system at the moment, you know, in the totality of things, the number of affordable properties there probably wasn't that great. I think it was in the order of 50 or 60 now. If you're one of the 50 or 60 people, you can't get a place, and obviously that's devastating. But we need to be talking in terms of thousands of council houses. And again, I'm using the word council, not affordable, because affordable covers a multitude of housing options, most of which aren't actually affordable, and most of which are pretty ruinous on the people who live there.
At the moment, we're working on a updated local plan.
Yeah.
Do you have any big concerns for that? What's your biggest priority for the updated local plan?
The updated plan is difficult. My priority, or our priority, will be to ensure that the documents that go with the plan, and in particular I'm thinking of the Borough Design Guide, and all aspects of the plan are designed around sustainability. The houses and the communities that we build coming out of the plan will be with us for the next 50, 100 years. So we've got a really good chance to get it right now. If we get it right now in terms of the amount of green space that's in these communities, the amount of energy which is generated by the communities, the provision of travel routes which prioritize cyclists and walking. If we get it right now, we can actually make a massive difference going ahead. And I think we can probably do that if we're ambitious enough and if we strive to be as best as we possibly can be, not adopt minimum government standards. Let's really push it. Let's really see how good we can be. My big fear is that the changes to the planning laws which are coming down the track from central government will mean that whatever we decide as a local authority will all be ripped up, because the changes to the planning laws will mean that developers have the right to build anywhere in the borough they want. And over the last 10 years, and most of that was before my involvement as a councillor, we've built communities. Well, we've encouraged house building in a few areas. That strategy won't work anymore, because the planning laws will designate the whole borough, apart from a small strip of green space around Twyford and Remenham, that sort of area. The whole borough will be either for redevelopment or it will be for growth. And in those two areas, the developers will have all the rights, and the planning committee of Wokingham Borough Council will not have anything to do, frankly, because the developers will have all the rights. And that is coming. That was in the Conservative manifesto. All of the local fuss about housing numbers has taken us back to where we were probably about the time of the general election, where the housing numbers are too high, but it's the ripping up the planning controls that will be absolutely devastating for this borough.
Talking somewhat related now about regeneration, which has been included in some of the housing schemes, and in fact some of the housing schemes have even funded regeneration sites. For example, Carnival Pool site is being used to sort of fund some of the stuff going on in Elmsfield and Wokingham. So outside of Wokingham town, do you have any hopes for the other town and village centres in our borough?
The main and most important town outside of Wokingham is Woodley. I think it's the only place with what I would call a proper town centre. With there's a case perhaps for Twyford and early, but they lack that very concentrated central business district that Woodley has. And I just don't see. I don't see the borough taking it seriously. I appreciate there are constraints in Woodley, but we've seen, in Woodley we've had a Wokingham Borough Conservative Council since the year dot. We've had a Woodley Conservative Town Council for I don't know 20 years or so, and in that time the main piece of development that we've seen that could be considered an attempt at regeneration has been this little wall that they've built in the town centre to try and stop people walking on paving stones which are coming up, and it was the people of Woodley are being conned. This wall I think cost £66,000. It came out of the highways budget. The highways budget is so big they wouldn't even notice building this little wall. Whereas the people in Woodley look at Wokingham and see, well, you've got all this money spent on Wokingham, all this borrowing, and what's going to happen in Woodley? And we've not seen it. Several decades of uninterrupted Conservative rule at every level has not seen anything done for Woodley. Now, I guess the Conservatives would point to things like, I don't know, Addington School or the Leisure Centre. But the fact is, these were going to be anyway. These aren't a gift of the Conservatives. These are part of the normal provision of borough services for all the residents in the borough, not for people in a particular area. So I don't see it. I don't see it. The history, I think, shows that there's just not the interest or the will there to do that.
What would Labour do instead?
That's a very good question. Well, we would look for opportunities to invest in Woodley. Now, I did write to the property investment group. This is the group which finds the money to buy warehousing. It finds the money to buy the new car park in Denmark Street in Wokingham. And I suggested that, well, one site which is up for redevelopment in Woodley is the Good Companion pub, and that whole site there is a site which the Borough Council could invest in if the borough was serious about investing in Woodley, and the answer I've had back is no.
Okay,
so it's yeah.
I'd like to talk to you now about children provision, health, well-being, these sorts of other parts of our lives that matter to everybody. And I'd like to first touch on young people specifically. Do you think that there is a link between antisocial behaviour and a lack of youth services and clubs? We've seen knife crime rise in our borough this year. What are your thoughts on this?
There's clearly a link between the lower levels of antisocial behaviour and the lack of youth provision, and it's one of the areas that anybody who sort of talks to people who are in youth work who isn't in the Borough Council accepts it. It's the withdrawing of borough support for the charities which work with young people, and it's less and less face time in safe environments for young people. Of course, you're going to have more young people wandering around on the streets. I mean, young people have always wandered around the streets and done stuff, you know, but it's a question of how do you get it down to a level which isn't seen as a problem. And if you're not going to invest in young people by way of youth provision, then that's one of the consequences. I don't think that's the same as the increase in knife crime. You know, I think from what I understand of the cases, they've been related to the sort of criminality that wouldn't be associated, that wouldn't have been fixed by an extra youth club or more youth workers. I think they're separate things, but they all contribute to the sense that things are getting out of control, and that's not helped by a police force which remains, I would say, heroically understaffed. Everyone values the work that our police and our PCSOs do, but there just aren't enough of them, and there haven't been enough of them for over 10 years because of austerity and the choice to cut funding on the police. And we've seen a slow sort of moving of that funding burden to local council taxpayers as well. But the Thames Valley Police hasn't recovered from austerity. The salaries are too low, the numbers are too low, and people know it. You know, we were in a meeting a couple of months ago, and we were told there were just 3 police officers for Wokingham Town and Crowthorne and Finchampstead. So if there's any sort of incident that requires more than 1 officer, straight away your coverage for the area has gone. And that is a result of Conservative choices to cut funding for the police.
I'd like to talk about adult well-being now. How has your party supported people during the pandemic, and what more could you be doing as we come out of it?
The advice from the Labour Party to all of our members was to get involved in local community support groups, and that's what we've done. I know that, so for example, Andy Croy, who's our candidate in Maiden Early, he was a volunteer at the Hub. We have another candidate who was she was the existing manager of a well-known food distribution charity in Wokingham, and I know that the hours that she's put in, you know, have been astonishing. I think she's been working that role as a full-time job, and I think it was advertised originally as 10 or 12 hours a week or something. I know Councillor Burgess has been involved at Wokingham Food Bank. I know over in Early, Councillor Boyd and Councillor Matthews set up the Whitegates Food Support Group, and I know councillors of all parties have chipped in and done whatever they can to help in the pandemic. In terms of coming out of the pandemic, that's a different issue. I think what's clear is that the community spirit that the pandemic engendered, and the underfunding of our health services, so these were a good thing and a bad thing that just became very, very obvious. People want community, but they also want properly funded public health services, and we can't carry on after the pandemic, the same way we did before. We can't carry on underfunding our charitable sector and underfunding our NHS. We want to build communities up rather than starve them of the funding that communities need to thrive. We can't run our society purely on the efforts of volunteers.
Thank you, Andy. And also on health,
Mm.
air pollution, particularly from cars, is at concerning levels in some parts of the borough. We've had a year of dealing with a virus that affects our lungs. How else could Wokingham Labour, or even as part of the group going forward from the elections, how could you protect residents' lungs a bit better?
I think a lot of this is going to be tied up in the response to the climate emergency. One of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases in the borough is emissions from cars, and pollution is also fundamentally a problem from emissions with cars. So any policies which take cars off the road and get more people walking, more people cycling, more people using public transport are policies which are going to improve our air quality. There isn't another way of doing it. I mean, there's a part of me thinking, well, more people wearing masks is probably going to help a little bit, but fundamentally, I think we need fewer cars on the roads.
Thank you. Talking about cars, and particularly now we're moving on to highways and transport, which is an area that affects quite a lot of us every day. Now, Wokingham Today has reported on road safety concerns of the A327 Reading Road. It's in Finchampstead. We've covered it 5 times in 10 months, but the issue was actually raised in March 2019. Now, this is just one example. Yeah, this is one example of people who just feel like their concerns are not being listened to and responded quickly. Do you think that more than 2 years is an appropriate wait time to have genuine concerns met?
Of course not, and this is, I mean, I know that I can speak from examples in my own ward where trying to get the simplest things done to make roads safer, it literally takes years and years and years. And I'm talking about much simpler things. I'm not talking about the sorts of measures that would be needed on the Finchampstead Road. And it seems we have a system which is geared towards ensuring I don't want to say rules, to ensuring, to making it as hard as possible for local people to actually influence what goes on around our houses. And for me, the fact that you've got a main road going past your front door shouldn't be a reason you can't influence how that main road is managed. If that means if all the cars going down that road are slowed by 10 miles an hour and just to make it safer, then that is a decision which I think should be much more controllable by local residents. We need to bring, I think, more democratic control into things like highways. At the moment, it's pretty much potluck. There's a process you have to go through, and if it doesn't meet criteria, then you're finished. And I can think of it. It's not just that example. There's the one I think in Swallowfield. No, not Swallowfield, sorry, Shinfield, where there's a bit of an accident black spot there where people are actually dying, but it just seems to take so long to get anything done. We've got in Wokingham, we've had several campaigns to get safer crossings, and it's all about making areas easier and safer for pedestrians to use. People must feel safe and secure when they're walking. If they can't do that, we're never going to get them out of their cars. And that's why it's not, we still have very much a sort of a car culture where cars come first, the main roads come first. And that's one of the things which we need to change. And not just to make roads safer, but also as part of our climate response.
Talking about cars, we've had a year of staying at home, and now COVID restrictions are easing, even slightly. Congestion is beginning to return. Residents do want to see their journey times reduced. So what can be done?
The way to reduce journey times is to have less cars on the road. It's not to use your car so much. So it's to walk, it's to cycle, it's to work from home. If people are able to work from home 5 days a week or 4 days a week, they need to be taking up those opportunities. All building more roads will do, or all the traditional engineering solutions to traffic management will do, is speed up the traffic temporarily, But because that route then gets a reputation as a quicker route, more traffic will go down that route, and you will end up with traffic speeds which are where they were, and you'll end up with the same level of congestion. And this is a rule of, it's almost like a law of traffic management. You know, we put this in to the executive in a paper from a task and finish group on the climate emergency that I was involved in. It's not been challenged. I mean, people in highways know that this happens, but we still persist with this fallacy that we can build more roads and that will sort the traffic problem. It won't. If you've got a major development, then you need a road, but the sorts of things which the borough's done in the past aren't doing that. Fixing it won't be easy. We need to get people onto public transport, and there's a whole platform of things we need to do around public transport, but it's also about, for the shorter journeys in particular, getting people not to use their cars.
Not using cars, we've got this Greenways project now, where lots and lots of different routes, and you know, it's meant to be great for cyclists and walkers and horse riders as well. Is it fair to pump this money into something that would predominantly be used as a leisure activity as opposed to a commuter route?
Yeah, I think that there's nothing wrong with pumping money into leisure activities. That's a really important thing. What we mustn't do is to fool ourselves into thinking that this is part of the response to the climate emergency. It's a nice leisure route, it's a bridle way, whatever you want to call it, but it is not a serious way of taking people out of their cars and off the roads. Okay, I accept we do need a network, we need a much better network of cycle routes, but to suddenly decide that the Greenways are part of the borough's response to the climate emergency when, you know, half of these things were in the plan from 10 years ago is absurd, and it's typical of the way that the Conservatives have tried to manage the whole climate emergency response. So here's something we're doing, let's whack that in the budget. And the Greenways, actually, in terms of carbon savings that are projected from the use of the Greenways, they are hopelessly inefficient, a hopelessly expensive way of trying to reduce our carbon emissions. They're just terrible, and that's in the documentation that's in the plan itself. You know, the opposition have ensured that every measure that goes into the plan actually has a carbon budget with it, so people can look at this and say, is this value for money? And in terms of the climate emergency, it's atrocious value for money. In terms of something that's nice to be doing on a Sunday with your family, you know, it's great. But let's look at it for what it is. It's one of these things. It's good to have. No one doesn't want them, but let's not pretend they are a response to the climate emergency, because they're not.
Thank you, Andy. So I'd now like to invite you to make some closing remarks directly to the voters of Wokingham.
People should vote for a Labour councillor in the local elections, because they know that their Labour councillor will stand up for them, it will stand up for their family, and it will stand up for their community. The Labour councillor will not disappear after the election and will not pop up in 4 years' time seeking your vote again. Our councillors work all through the year, not just at election time. This area is dominated by the Conservatives. Good local government requires an effective opposition. Only your Labour councillors will give the effective opposition to the Conservative council. Thank you.